Dolton's mayor and the indicted and terminated assistant chief of police, who now has a no-go order anywhere on the village without an escort, they are threatening officers with insubordination if they do not follow the directions of the terminated assistant chief of police. They've got a new chief of police. They've got an interim police chief. This whole thing, let's get into it. Here we go. This is just some nutty stuff right here.
No, Keith Freeman do not work here. He's fired. So stop playing these silly games, board of trustees, and putting people's lives in jeopardy. So I'm here to tell everybody from the horse's mouth, which I made this statement at the board meeting. So it's nothing different. So any questions? Anybody questions?
So you guys know, Keith Freeman did get a letter of termination. Okay? Now from this point on, do what you want. But anything after this is insubordination. Okay?
Any questions? Concerns? And then always keep our mental in check because you know there's a lot going on. And I hate that y'all going through this stuff. Just for real. On some real stuff. Go see HR. Don't let nobody mess with your peace. Keep your peace. Whatever y'all can do. Just keep it. But that's it. As long as I can. Cover nothing else. They put on the show called
Hey, good meeting, solid meeting. Don't talk to anybody if you don't follow this guy over here who has been fired from the village. If you don't follow his order, his directives, we're going to charge you with insubordination. Mayor Tiff and former assistant chief of police, Chief Lacy, they are holding on to their power structure without anything. They got nothing. Literally, they don't even have a police chief that is legit. During a meeting today, Dolton Mayor Tiffany Henyard and the federally felony indicted and terminated by village board, Assistant Chief Louis Lacy, threatened Dolton police officers with insubordination if they do not recognize Lacy as their chief of police. I loved it when Chief Lacy says, all right, from here on out, you can do what you want, but just know this, that if you don't follow my orders, it's going to be insubordination. They talked about the Keith Freeman, his letter of termination. Is he terminated? Because we've got, I'll show you in a sec. Lacy is just a couple of hours shy of his arraignment by a federal grand jury on felony bankruptcy fraud charges. There's that. That's the chief that they're supposed to be following, even though he's fired and he's been directed. This meeting here was an official meeting called by Tiff and the Chief Lacy, former Chief Lacy, but it was not mandatory. It was not mandatory, but they made it mandatory, but it's not mandatory. Chief Lacy, not in a position of power because he's been fired. Whole thing is just so wildly convoluted and such a mess. All right. So here's the conflicting email. Dolton's indicted police chief banned from village property. Mayor Henyard's mandatory meeting, not mandatory. Okay. All right. So we've got some conflicting information here. And an email sent by Dolton Village Administrator Keith Freeman to all Dolton police officers. How many of them are there, though? Just a handful? Acting Chief Lacy is no longer employed by the village of Dolton, but he's still holding meetings, and he's still telling you that you might be insubordinate if you don't follow his rule. Lacy is not permitted in any village spaces reserved for employees except with an escort. The wording says only without escort. Only without. Okay. All right. Shouldn't it be only with escort? Should be, I think, but whatever. Commander Guess. Who is Commander Guess? Guess. Commander Guess is now the commander in charge of the village police department until further notice. Okay. All right. Let's go with that. Where was Commander Guess at the mandatory meeting that wasn't mandatory, where they're going to be considered insubordinate if they didn't follow the rule of Acting Chief Lacy, who is no longer employed by the village of Dolton? Yeah. Anyway. All right. Well, any contact with or orders given by Lacy or Henyard regarding Lacy's work status should be directed in writing to Inspector Baker. We got Inspector Baker. We got Commander Guest. We got new players here. We got some players, right? We got some players. What are we doing? Any contact with or orders given. So what we're saying, what you're saying, and this is an email from Keith Freeman, who they're saying, who Tiff, dictator of Dolton, the Tahoe Tiff, and Chief Lacy are saying that Keith Freeman is gone. But he's sending out emails with the fictional village, what's going on. And, Mayor Tiffany Henyard's call for a mandatory meeting with all police officers, Henyard and Lacy, is not mandatory. So that mandatory meeting where they told everybody that, the police officers, that Keith Freeman was fired, and they talked about the not the resignation letter, but him being fired. That meeting, not mandatory. So this whole notion of insubordination from the already fired assistant chief of police, apparently that meeting, not mandatory, and whatever they said in that meeting, it didn't count for a hill of beans. And any officer may choose to attend or not attend without fear of repercussions, other than they're being told by their former assistant chief that they'll be insubordinate. They'll be charged with insubordination. Wow. Just some nuttiness, right? On another note, we keep going back to this. Former Dolton police officer Louis Lacy will be arraigned on his 9-count federal grand jury indictment on bankruptcy fraud charges. And that meeting is going on right now as we speak. It is 10 to 3 Seattle time. So that is 10 to 5 Chicago time. And his meeting was going to go at 4 p.m. See what happens from that, right? See what happens from that. Okay, so you got that. So the other story we've got is Illinois comptroller stops some state payouts to Dolton, threatens fines, threatens more audits, and basically just drops the hammer on the village of Dolton and starts going after the Freedom of Information Acts, which have not been issued by the village because they just basically don't do anything that they should be doing from an official standpoint. Illinois comptroller Susana Mendoza said Thursday she's immediately suspending what are called offset fund payments to Dolton for the village's failure to turn over annual financial reports to her office. Yep. All right. So this year, that money is going to be $135,000. And I'm just going to kind of summarize this one. Got a full podcast out on this one as well. Should be coming out at the same time. And Mendoza said it's also threatening fines if Dolton doesn't file the required reports. Those fines could amount to $78,600 and some mandatory audits. All right. You're going to get whatever books you got together, whatever financial information you got together. Lori Lightfoot got a bunch of information together and she was able to cobble a report. So that's what they're talking about doing. Some mandatory audits. The offset money. What is this $135,000 that would come from the state comptroller down to the village of Dolton? The offset money comes from things such as child support, parking ticket, and traffic fines that an individual who lives in Dolton has not paid. So you got outstanding child support, you got parking tickets or traffic fines. You may have the money is withheld from individual state income tax refunds. So in state of Illinois, you've got an income tax because of course you do. You got to pay for all this crap for people who aren't working. And that comes from, you got to take taxes from those who are working. So you got a state income tax. If somebody is getting a refund, just like you would with the IRS on the federal level, if you are owed a refund at the state level in Illinois, but then you owe child support or parking tickets or traffic fines, the state, through the state comptroller, can take money that you are owed as a refund and pay the village for the child support, parking ticket, and those kind of things that you owe. So if you've got outstanding fines, fees, whatever, it can come right out of your state income tax refund. So the money that went to Dolton last year from the state comptroller was $120K. This year it's $135. Then you've got $78,600 in fines that the state could levy on top of mandatory audits. You've just got, the hammer being dropped. And I find it interesting that this is coming out exactly 1 week after former Mayor Lori Lightfoot came out with her report. Now, her report isn't really binding. It just indicates to the village, this is where you sit. And where they sit is a world of hurt. Full podcast on that one. You can check that one out as well. We've got podcasts on just about every single event that has happened in the village of Dolton or township of Thornton over the last handful of months. Prior to that, I did a couple. I wasn't really tuned into this storyline. It was like, oh yeah. But then the more and more I saw of this storyline coming out, I was intrigued from the standpoint of these are shenanigans on a massive scale. You've got the village of Dolton following Tiff, the super mayor, the dictator of Dolton. You've got the village of Dolton following her, which is not somebody you want to be following. She's not in compliance at all. And literally, she's having these meetings with their police officers with a police chief that shouldn't even be in uniform. He shouldn't even be in uniform. He is not a police officer at the moment. He is impersonating a police officer. And he's telling the police officers in Dolton that you'll be insubordinate if you don't listen to what I say. Meanwhile, the village administrator, Keith Freeman, who may or may not be employed, we don't really know, is sending out emails saying, hey, yeah, mandatory meeting, not so mandatory. Don't listen to what he's saying. Don't listen to what Tiff is saying. He's been fired. Just crazy, crazy stuff. So let's get down to the freedom of information. Mendoza said Dolton Village Clerk Allison Key emailed her office frustrated that the village is also not complying with the state's Freedom of Information Act. As village clerk, I've been unable to reply to Freedom of Information Acts because the village administrator, Keith Freeman, has instructed department heads not to reply to any Freedom of Information Act request coming from me. Just don't send one out. They ask you for it. Don't send it out. That is illegal. So not filing the reports, the audited reports, the reports in general, not doing the Freedom of Information as requested. They're just out of compliance in every single direction they turn. Key in her email to Mendoza said that Freeman has illegally removed me as Freedom of Information Officer without Board of Trustees knowledge or vote of approval. He's continued to interfere with the Freedom of Information process for the past 2 years. This is Keith Freeman. This is the village admin. In February, in response to a lawsuit filed by Nexstar Media, Attorney General 𝗪𝗏 filed a binding opinion ordering Dolton to turn over documents the state had requested of the village via the state Freedom of Information law. But guess what happened? Yeah, you got it. Dolton disregarded the order. Yeah, that's weird, isn't it? That's strange. That's crazy. Crazy talk. Crazy stuff going on. Now, these stories are, yeah. You've got a rogue mayor. You've got a rogue, wildly out of compliance, former assistant chief. Now you got a new interim chief. And you've got all kinds of the lawsuits that the village of Dolton must be facing have got to be just incredible. Because how else are you going to get anything? If you're owed this, if you've got an invoice in that $6.1 million stack of invoices, 589 invoices, if your invoice is in there, what else are you going to do? You just going to, I'm just going to let my business go sideways because the village won't pay? No, you're going to lawyer up. You're going to have a class action lawsuit. You're going to have who knows what. You're going to have all kinds of stuff. Craziness, absolute anarchy in the village of Dolton. How much of this will spill over to the township of Thornton? Who knows? But Tiff isn't, she's not the mayor there. She's the supervisor of trustees. Also doesn't look good. But from what I can piece together, township of Thornton doesn't have the exposure that village of Dolton does. Village of Dolton is hurting for certain. All right. That's it for me on this one. Thanks so much for being here. I'd love to have you subscribe, do all that good stuff, because we're going to keep these Dolton drama videos going. Thanks again. See you on the next one. Bye for now.